If we take a look in the project panel, under the movie files, you'll find that I've created a very quick 3D flag. Double-clicking on the source material, you can see that it's a movie, simply a piece of cloth created in 3D with an alpha channel. In After Effects, the preference has been set here so I can actually see where the alpha channel is by clicking on this movie. I'll close this out and drag this into my timeline. An easy way to introduce something in the timeline is to simply use the command, or on a PC, the control button and the / button. Now if I click and drag on the timeline, I can see the piece of cloth animating and the movement of the building in the background. Next, I'll move my timeline back to the position where I started my track. What I want to do is track the 4 corners of my corner pin to the 4 corners of this new flag movie. Note that the corners of the flag movie aren't the corners of the flag itself, but the corners of the layer. Here we can see the bottom corners of the flag movie here, the lower left, and on the other side, the lower right. The corner pins will affect these points, not the points here inside of my animation on the lower left and the lower right. I'll move back into my layer window so I can see all the options for my tracking data. I'll click Edit Target just to make sure that the right layer is selected. The right layer isn't selected because although it appears that I only have 2 layers in this composition, those other layers are still there but merely shied away. So from the layer pull down, I'll choose Quick Flag number 1 and say OK. I'll apply that, and inside this layer, the corner pin has moved the corners of that entire layer into the space of the middle column. Let's take a look at the position values for our target layer. To do this, I'm going to open up the timeline just a little bit so we can see a little more of the parameters and a little less of our composition. Navigating over here, I can see that the layer has not only position keyframes applied to it, but also an effect called corner pin. The reason for this is I can't have multiple positions on the layer. Additionally, the controls on the corners of the layer don't affect its position, but affect instead its size. The effect called corner pin does affect the layer's position for the upper left, upper right, lower left, and lower right. This is a perfect plugin to be controlled by the tracking data that we've just created. I'll use F2 to deselect all of the layers, then click on the flag once again to show the effect. Here inside my effects controls, I can see very obviously our corner pin is set and all of the data for the 4 pins has been transferred to this effect. By clicking and dragging in the timeline, I can see that the flag is now locked to my track. However, the flag doesn't really fit across the inside of this arch. In order to change that, I'll type S on the keyboard, unlink the scale, and then simply change the scale of the X value. By changing the scale of the X value, however, I can see that the left-hand side of the flag is now covering the outside of the archway. Again, I'll use the anchor point tool to offset the position so that it fits more uniformly in the center of this archway. I'll go back to 4 seconds and type B on the keyboard to set the beginning of my work area. Pressing 0 on the number pad will show a quick RAM preview of what this will look like in the center column. Just as we did for the small flags and the lions, we'll duplicate this flag and change the anchor point value so that it appears in the left-hand and the right-hand archway. With a layer selected, we'll simply type A to bring up our anchor point control and offset the anchor point for each one of these layers. We'll rename these so that we can tell one flag from the other. The first one will be our left banner, then our right banner, and finally our center banner. On the right-hand side, we may need to bring up the banner just a little bit. It's floating a little lower than the other 2. We can type in a numeric value to change it specifically to 204 pixels. This looks fine, except that when we scrub in the timeline, we can see that each of these 3 banners now shares the exact same timing. Fortunately, the layer for the animation is longer than the time we need it for in our composition. So, navigating back to the beginning of the area where we need these, we'll select the left banner and holding the Shift key, select the right banner. We'll trim into this area by holding down the Option key or the Alt key on a PC and then using the left open bracket. Then we'll navigate to the end of the composition by typing on the End button on the keyboard. Now we'll use the Option button or the Alt button on a PC and use the Close bracket to trim the end of the layer. With these layers now trimmed in, we'll press F2 to deselect both of them and click on one of them to select just one of the banners. Typing Y on the keyboard brings us back to our Pan Behind tool, and now with the Pan Behind tool, I can click and drag to offset the timing of the layer inside of my edit. I'll slip the edit just a little bit for the left banner, and slip it perhaps the other way just a little bit for the right banner. Now with those two slipped, only the tracking data is shared between the three layers. The last thing we want to do to bring these back into our composition is add a few subtle effects that will make these blend more with our scene. The first thing I want to do is select the left banner, then under the Layer pull-down window, select Layer Styles, and choose a drop shadow. I don't need a very big drop shadow, but I do need a soft shadow. So under the Properties for the drop shadow, I'll change the spread to about 15%, and I'll change the opacity to about 20%. By turning the eyeball on and off for that layer style, we can see the subtle difference that small drop shadow has added. Next, with the layer still selected, I'll move up to the Effects Control panel and right-click to bring up the effects. I'll go down to Generate and create a ramp. We can define the ramp with the start and the end, and giving it some color and shadow across the face of the cloth animation. I want to blend this back with the original source by about 50%. The last effect I want to apply is a very simple color correction, and it's new to After Effects CS3. It's called Tritone. After adding Tritone, I'll simply blend this back with the original by about 50% as well. I'll twirl these up and apply the same two effects by pressing Shift and clicking on both of them to select both Ramp and Tritone. Then I'll use Command-C or Control-C on a PC to copy them into the buffer. With the right banner and the center banner selected next, I'll use Command-V to paste those effects onto both of those as well. By pressing 0 on the number pad, I get my last round preview to see what all of these trackers can do for me in this very simple composition. I encourage you to try different tracking positions on the library scene and on the other scenes as well. Try to figure out how to make your own tracks, whether they're 1 point, 2 point, 4 point, or even stabilizing motion. I've included a little bonus clip called Brian Haircut Movie, and if you stabilize the clip on Brian's glasses, you get a very fun animation.